I was failing matric. I was failing matric.
I only lived for the next hit. I only lived for the next hit.
I couldn't help how I felt. But my parents never accepted me.
I was surrounded by darkness. I was surrounded by darkness.
No one told me there was help out there.
One in 4 people in South Africa suffer from some form of mental health disorder. Mental health has been hidden behind a curtain of stigma and discrimination for too long.
The state of mental health in South Africa is shocking, and the picture appears to be getting worse. More than 17 million people in South Africa are battling with depression, substance abuse, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. Of more concern, though, is that 75% of these people will not get any form of help. The Department of Health spends approximately 10 billion rands annually on mental illnesses. And public health facilities are struggling to cope with the ever-increasing burden of mental illness. On the other hand, mental illness are amongst the biggest cost drivers in the private health sector. So today we take a closer look at mental health in South Africa, with focus on some of the most common mental illnesses. For any questions or views on this topic, please call us on Johannesburg 714-6843, 6847 or 6857. Or simply interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk, and on Twitter at SABC Health Talk, including our email address, of course, healthtalk@sabc.co.za. I'm Dr. Sello Mutaun, and this is Health Talk.
Many people experiencing mental illness delay seeking help because they are frightened by the illness and fear the stigma associated with it. 4 out of 5 people with mental disorders in developing countries do not receive treatment. Globally, especially in low and middle income countries, people with mental disabilities suffer tremendous abuse, both physically and emotionally. Like Debbie, who has been a resident for 16 years in Cotonia, a mental health rehabilitation center. She tells us about her story as she moved from shelter to shelter and the abuse she has suffered due to her mental state.
My name is Debbie Roll. I went from shelter to shelter after not being at home. I've been in and out of hospitals through the post-traumatic stress and depression. I've been raped a few times, so that also put a lot on me. So I haven't been very well. And then I heard about Cotonia, which I've been brought here now. I've been here for 16 years. And I must say, this for me is like a home, because I've learned a lot and I've grown a lot since I've been here. Not talking medical, not talking about medication-wise, but physically and mentally, I've learned a lot. I've learned how to take care of me health-wise. I'm still battling mentally-wise because it is a bit of a battle.
She explains to us how depression affected her and how she managed to deal with it.
Depression is not an easy thing to deal with, especially with me not having depression types at the moment. It's very difficult. I have my moments, not as bad as I used to, but I have my moments where I'm tearful. But for someone else, like it's just still dealing with it deeply, it's very hard. It's not something you just can change overnight.
Because of the advocacy and support they get at the rehabilitation center, they feel more at home there than with their own families. As with Debbie, who wishes to go back home and live with her mother, but the reality of her condition frightens her.
I feel more home here. Being out there, even though you're with your family, it's very stressful. And for me, I can't handle much stress, and I have a relapse. And from, I would love to stay with my mom, on the other hand, but at the same time, my mom's not always going to be there, you see.
Most of the challenges people with psychosocial disabilities are faced with is indeed a violation of their human rights, like failure in accessing adequate healthcare services, failure in accessing employment, education, housing and social security. Often, these are as a result of stigma and discrimination. Naku Masuku, who is a social worker at a mental health rehab, admits to the claims that the public and government are not doing enough to eradicate the stigmas and misconceptions around mental health.
I don't think people understand completely the issue of mental health as a whole, or mental illnesses, the people that we see on the streets. So they are not basically as individuals taken seriously, even in their family environments, where you'll find that a person is an elder brother with mental illness. Normally, when a person is an elder brother, people respect them. But because a person has got mental illness, they take that and then use it and not give that respect. And then when coming to government also, there's been a lot of talks around. People are saying it's only when it's mental health month in July, everybody will be excited about mental health. But when it goes deeper into the budgets that are allocated for mental health, you don't get much, actually.
According to Ms. Masuku, mental health problems can be dealt with if only it was made a priority and be in the open from all levels.
As much as we are doing the awarenesses, we are at a smaller scale because of the lack of funds. So I would like that to be seen out there with the support from the government coming out there. And then the other thing, maybe, I know most of our officials, there are people in their environments or in their families with mental illness. Let's talk about that. Let it be out there so that people don't, it can remove the stigma if we know that so and so, who's the minister, has had a mother who suffered with mental illness.
Most people are afraid of admitting if some of their family members or loved ones seem to have mental issues, even if the symptoms present themselves.
I think firstly, as families, we need to be observant, because there are symptoms that they present themselves before you can even think that a person has mental illness. Like I'm saying that mental health is wide. There's a broad spectrum of illnesses that comes with it.
This is where encouragement plays a vital role in terms of their families and service providers of mental health care services, who should be supporters, identifying and voicing the needs of those affected by mental health conditions. Bengu Shongwe, who is the general manager of Cotonia, explains to us the process of admission and some of the programs they undergo in helping the patients to fully recover.
As Cotonia, we are serving as a bridge between hospital discharge and community re-entry. So we serve as that bridge. So the provincial hospitals will discharge the patient, but you'll realize that the patient is not yet ready to go to the larger community. So we serve as a link between the community and the hospital.
It is important to allow the developmentally delayed person every opportunity to realize their highest potential by stimulation, training, and acceptance as soon as the developmental delay is diagnosed.
Right. This insight brings to the fore pertinent issues about mental illness, such as, the burden of illness, its impact, the stigma associated with the disease, treatment and support, amongst others. Now, to help us unpack this a little further, we're joined in studio by two expert guests. First up is Dr. Reiki Liebenbeck, who's a specialist psychiatrist in private practice in Johannesburg. And with her is Ms. Patricia Adonisi from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Ladies, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Let me start with you, Dr. Liebenbeck. Sometimes these things can be quite confusing. Sometimes mental health is equated to mental illness, and there's all different types of mental illnesses, we're told. Perhaps let's just start off by describing what mental health is, and perhaps the difference between mental health and mental illness.
That's a very difficult question to answer, actually, because mental health.
My apologies to start with a difficult question.
Mental health is, I think, well-being in all aspects. It's not just a question of existing. Mental health would be being happy, content, productive, and functional.
Right.
Functional is a word we like to use when we treat people, because it's not just about taking away the symptoms or whatever, it's returning them to functionality, whether it's at work or in their families. We like to get them back to normal functioning. And it's more than just an absence of symptoms. There also has to be quality of life, enjoyment, being able to socialize, being able to work, being able to have leisure activities that give you pleasure. So it's quite a wide concept.
All right. Now, we quote statistics that we're saying that 1 in 3 South Africans, for instance, is said to be having mental illness. To what extent do we know the true burden of mental illnesses rather, in our society?
I don't think we have good statistics or knowledge of what's happening in South Africa. We just don't. But we have, America keeps good statistics, the Scandinavian countries, and what we've learned is that human beings globally would have the same conditions to a large extent. So we know that depression will be soon, in a few years' time, the second leading cause of disability, of all illnesses.
Yeah. So depression is actually on the rise, and it's becoming a serious problem.
I don't know if it's on the rise or if it's just better recognized and better diagnosed, because
let's get a perspective. Yeah, let's get a perspective from the South African Anxiety and Depression Group, SADC. Patricia, how much do we know about the extent of mental illnesses in South Africa?
What we are doing here, Doctor, at SADC, we educate communities because there's little knowledge. We find out that there's little knowledge with regard to mental illnesses that are there. So we've got programs, we've got activities where we go to communities, we go to school to talk about suicide, to talk about depression. As Dr. Liebenbeck was saying, that depression, it looks like it's in a rise. We've seen that in our own stats that it's 1 in 5. Of individuals.
Would you say that more and more people are becoming aware of existence of mental illnesses?
Yes, Doctor. Think of it, in our own languages. We do not have, for an example, we have mental illness, or mental health, which just say ukugula kwengqondo. We cannot say what is bipolar, what is depression in our own languages. You see.
Maybe let's get it from the expert. Just help us here. People don't quite understand the difference between major depression and feeling sad. For instance, the difference between just depressed mood and development of mental illness or frank, mental illness. What symptoms should people be looking out for?
It's a very definite diagnosis. It's not just feeling sad for a day or feeling sad in reaction to maybe a sad event. It's an illness, it's a mental illness caused by a brain dysfunction. It's not a weakness of character or a personality disorder. It's actually a brain dysfunction caused by a combination of genetic factors and maybe circumstances or medical illnesses. I
want us to come back to the causes a bit later on. But for someone watching this and not being certain, what are the type of symptoms that can indicate to one that, there's a possibility of a mental illness in this person?
If we're looking at depression, which is probably one of the most common ones, you would look at a sad, or an irritable mood.
Right.
At least for 2 weeks and pervasive. It cannot just be for a day or two and is easily relieved by something that happens that makes them happy.
Right.
So it's pervasive for at least 2 weeks.
Right.
Sad or irritable mood, lack of interest and pleasure,
Right.
helplessness, hopelessness, not sleeping well, not eating well, not having the energy to get up and do what you have to do in the morning. And very importantly, it also disturbs thinking. So people think negatively about themselves, about the world, about how other people see them. They have lack of motivation, lack of drive. And it's pervasive and it's serious. If it's very serious, it leads often into suicidal thinking.
Which is a problem. Eh?
Which is a
and
danger.
generally the course of illness. I mean, when you have a bout of flu, it probably, 3-4 days and then you're well again. With mental illness, what's your experience? How long do these, stay on for?
Well, untreated, they can last for months, 2 years even. And it also depends on how long the illness was present before we start treatment. So if somebody's been ill for a year, it's not going to be fixed in 2 weeks. It takes at least 2 to 4 weeks for the medication to start working. If you're doing psychotherapy, that's a months long process.
Okay, maybe it's on that point that we just pause for a while, and when we return, we now discuss impact, causes, and risk factors for mental illness. Please stay with us.
Hello, it's a favorite minister here. Yane, party is a very nice language because it was written by you, the people. Here's a good one. Try hard, and the individual who tries against all odds. Hoi! Give me water!
Help make Party South Africa's 12th official language. Sign the petition today.
This one is good, hey?
Zoom into Africa. This is Eritrea. The president is Mr. Isaias Afewerki. Eritrea got independent from Ethiopia on 24th May in 1993. The population is over 5 million people. One of the major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit is the Nakfa.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological disorder that some people will develop after they've experienced an event where they believe that they were under some kind of serious physical threat or that someone else was under physical threat.
I was raped by 4 men. My opinion of them that they were children, but nevertheless they were. On one Saturday morning, they decided to have their way with me. Each one had their turn. Fortunately, they were interrupted because the last one didn't actually finish with me. They were interrupted because the train came by. Strangely enough, people walked right past me. I was indecently exposed. And people walked right past me.
Ndandi na 8 years ne ndarechwa cousin brother wam. Then azange ndithethe emva kokuba ndirepile ndahlala nayo. And then ukuhleleni kwam nayo yani affecta but ke ngoku mna
kulani bama senikhulele ezilalini into eyenzeka ezilalini so ndandingayazi mna uba ndi-affectwa yi-rape because ndatshintsha indlela endibehave ngayo.
Rape survivors in this country often experience a lot of blame and rejection from their families and communities. Then that puts you at more risk of developing PTSD.
I mean, PTSD definitely fits into rape trauma syndrome, but there's certain things that PTSD doesn't actually delineate. It doesn't talk about the very real consequences around having been sexually violated, is that you're not going to get HIV as a result, or you're not going to fall pregnant or develop an STI.
I never, for a very long time, I didn't speak to any of my family. A lot of guilt came to the surface. I felt like I handed myself over on the platter. With everything that I was going through, the anger, the retaliation and the rebelliousness, everything that I was going through, I never spoke about the actual incident.
Sense that the rape has taken any sense of control they ever had in their lives. Lots of anger will come up, and anger is sometimes a very difficult thing for women to deal with. Their behavior has changed in some way as well. Sometimes people may become more promiscuous, and it's a way of trying to say, well, I'm in control here. Nobody is going to control me again.
I end up HIV positive because bendilala around and bendingasebenzisi condom, which is loo nto into yobanga into yoba ndibeka ndilala around andinayo icontrol yomzimba wam. Into yoba ngaba ndingabi icontrol yomzimba wam yilaa nto uba ndandireyitsiwe. So bendingenayo icontrol nomzimba wam, and then low self-esteem.
Avoidant kind of behaviors, becoming quite dependent on people, but at the same time sort of wanting to push people away, very much linked to trust issues as well, which is a prominent thing for many survivors. Their trust has been broken because often the survivor is raped by someone they know.
I was scared at the process of ever being able to enjoy intimacy. Just will my life be normal again? And it did get normal. You don't get over this. This is not something that you get over, but you learn to live with it. It's how you deal with it that shows you that you've grown. And
I don't see why something that is so profound should affect you for the rest of your life. It's not fair. The perpetrator is the one that is carrying on with his life, and you're feeling like your life has maybe stopped or has been affected in some way. You deserve more.
Give me the keys, I'll get off my knees and stand. I'll drive you home and follow you around.
Right. This clip highlights, amongst others, how traumatic incidents such as rape can have devastating mental effects on their victims, often resulting in severe mental illness. So our experts will help us understand a little further causes and risk factors for mental illness. And joining us at this stage is Ms. Naku Masuku, who's the Service Manager and Social Worker from the Gauteng Mental Health Society. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you,
Naku.
Doctor. Thank you.
All right. We're talking now, we've described, shortly or briefly, mental illness and, the burden of mental illnesses in South Africa. But I just thought that before we can start talking about treatment, let's try and understand the risk factors and causes for various mental health, illnesses. Shall we start with you, Dr. Liebenberg?
Well, it's complex.
Yeah.
It's definitely there has to be a genetic vulnerability.
Right.
Not everybody.
There has to be.
Not everybody becomes depressed.
Right.
But sometimes these genetic factors are not overt. They're not out there to see.
Right.
But when they are impacted upon by trauma or stress factors,
Right.
especially cumulative stress over time,
okay. So
the illness can manifest.
Putting it simply then, if your parent had major depression at some point in their lives, and you're more likely to have depression yourself, especially if there's some traumatic incident that happens. Basically, that's what you're saying.
That's
All
what
right.
I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah.
Being a woman, predisposes you to depression. The incidence is twice that in women than it is in men. So there's something hormonal involved there.
Because I was about to ask you why is that?
We can't pinpoint exactly what,
Yeah.
but something. And when a woman falls pregnant or she has a baby, the incidence goes very high. Menopause is another risk time. Sexual abuse will increase your chances of depression times 6, physical abuse times 4 in childhood. So childhood stress can impact on adult depression later on.
Okay.
The one clear factor is losing a parent at a young age will increase your chances of depression something like 10 times above that of the normal population. So childhood abuse, trauma, stress, loss is a big issue.
What about some of the biological factors, other diseases perhaps that a person might be suffering from?
Yes, there are many neurological diseases, illnesses such as diabetes, Parkinson's, having had a stroke or a heart attack. If you have an autoimmune illness such as lupus or arthritis, and even the treatments of those illnesses can also cause depression. So there are medications, there are illnesses, and of course drugs.
Maybe let's just get a perspective from Ms. Masuku here about some of those social, factors that are out there that seem to be exacerbating or, put differently, act as risk factors for mental illnesses.
Yeah, there are social factors. It could be substance abuse.
Right.
Some of the mental illnesses are induced by substance abuse, where a person will be, I wouldn't say that they would have had an underlying, but it gets triggered when a person is abusing dagga or alcohol or whatever. And then also sometimes it's other types of abuses where you'll find that the child at home is being abused, maybe is an orphan or whatever. So those social factors might also cause it. And also sometimes it becomes severe when a child is being bullied. Right. Also, it does happen
that's a serious one, because we see more and more of that.
Because it might happen that it goes to an extent where the child cannot cope. Moreover, where there is no support from home or the child is not telling anyone about it, so that happens as well. It also happens with stress levels. A lot of people are stressed in the communities now. So this also shows us, because there are many creators of stress, that no one will say that I'm immune to mental illness, because anything can happen to you anytime, and then you will be mentally ill. So
persistent stress.
Persistent stress could be another trigger where a person is not coping with something. It could be violence at home, in a relationship or wherever. So those are some of the causes that trigger.
Also,
Patricia,
Also unemployment to other people, We live in a country where we've got high rate of unemployment. Being terminally ill are some of those, like Doctor has already mentioned, losing a loved one. Also the changes that one might go through, maybe moving from high school, going to tertiary. To some people.
You raised an interesting one, unemployment, clearly related to financial difficulties. Yes. The one common question that people often ask is poverty a risk factor for mental illness or not? Your view?
According to my own personal view, I wouldn't say yes or no, because there are people who are living in those conditions and they are doing well. But there are those people who cannot cope.
Okay.
Under
so Sarak
such
says yes and no. Ms. Masuku?
For me, it goes back to the issue of stress. Because mostly, if you don't know what you're going to eat for the day, or your children, what you're going to feed your children, it's stressful. So it can get to that point where a person do become mentally ill. But I don't want to associate it, because I've seen with the stigma that is in the communities, people will say that, like if I can give you an example, people will expect that because you are poor or whatever, then it goes with mental illness. And then because there are some illnesses in mental health where they have issue, where a person will not be hygienically able. So you find that sometimes a person is going for the grant, and then the doctor will say, we've had those cases at SASA where a doctor will say, you say you are mentally ill, but why are you so clean? Which is really not right.
Well, there's the doctor who's your view.
No, of course, your hygiene has got nothing to do with it. You know, if people are psychotically disordered, as in schizophrenia, they often lose the ability to care or clean for themselves if they don't have the support, somebody to structure, like a mother or somebody to look after them. But it has nothing to do with mental illness. But poverty can be a stress factor, certainly. I don't think it's causative. But it's an additional stress factor. And also, then, of course, access to help is limited.
When mental illness sets in, I guess. The one other area we didn't talk about is the workplace. I mean, you know, there's been reports that the rates of depression in the workplace are on the rise. Your comment?
Yes, because if you look at it, that we spend 8 hours of our day in the workplace.
Right.
So if there are things that are being stressful, it could be your boss, it could be your colleague, it could be any other thing in terms of your work content. So it does happen that a person is very stressed due to what is happening at work.
So bosses are really stressful, isn't it? All right, let's just pause it for now. Now, being diagnosed with mental illness is not the end of the world for you, as there are many different treatment options available. More on that after the break. Stay with us.
A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. Governments here are working hard to ensure that the continent's technology matches that of more advanced countries.
High-speed internet connectivity is regarded as a utility.
As the continent battles diseases like Ebola, social media becomes the preferred method to share information.
People on social media are some of the society's most influential.
To find out more, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on SABC News.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
There's no way that you can control life.
I've never ever told my stories or how I feel, but I know once I'm on stage or I'm in that rehearsal room, that's where I start telling it out.
I was involved in car accident. I was with my friends, we were 4 in the car, and unfortunately, the guys I was with, they passed away on the scene.
I was at home. Either I didn't lock my gate or I didn't lock my door. And the next thing that woke me up was hearing a sound. I only remember seeing some darkness just in front of me as I got up, and then something brought me down again, and apparently that was the time I was stabbed. 5.5 months later, I woke up at my parents' home, not knowing where was I.
I was in hospital from 2007 till 2010 December. I feel depressed a lot, emotional, very frustrated, because I thought maybe that was my end of life.
The doctor said one slip and then you're dead. I know deep down inside I'm scared, but it's something that I needed to do, and because it felt natural.
He said, no, I must go for the auditions, because he told me that I can dance.
It helped me a lot, and it helped me physically, and it helped me emotionally.
Dance is a form of therapy for me, because I'm not so talkative. But by dancing, I talk a lot.
Talk. There's hope out there, and there's love out there.
I was trying to find a good life like everybody. I was not lucky enough to be successful till I started dancing.
Makes me feel good. Makes me feel really good. It's freedom.
There are various forms of treatment available for mental illness. Dance therapy, as seen in the clip we've just played, is just but one of the ways. Now, let's learn more about treatment of mental illnesses from our experts, and we join at this stage by Ms. Mara Zanella, who's a counseling psychologist in private practice in Johannesburg. Welcome to Health Talk, Mara.
Thank you for having me.
Right, let's talk, before we start treatment, I think it's always best to start looking at prevention. We've just gone through describing, causes and possible risk factors. Perhaps let me start with you, Mara. Prevention. I mean, just perhaps to kickstart the discussion, I mean, we've seen just how sometimes traumatic incidents can, act as major risk factors for, mental illness, such as rape, for instance. Now, how can people protect, or how can people deal with those kind of incidents such a way that they delay or rather mental illness doesn't set in at all?
I think it's important to know that a lot of mental illnesses are not preventable completely, but we can certainly put things in place to help alleviate those risk factors. So things like Dr. Liebenberg spoke about earlier in terms of mental health, having support around you. So having family members, having people to talk to, looking at your lifestyle factors, exercise, diet, all of those things are going to help to minimize your risk of developing a mental health problem. And then also once you do, that will help with the process of recovery as well.
Losing a job, and we mentioned unemployment. Losing a job can also be a stress. How can people deal with that aspect?
It's quite difficult. Like my colleague here is saying that some of those things are not preventable. So if you lose a job, it's not out of your own doing. So you might just be in a situation. But what I'm thinking also is that a lot of awarenesses, like we do some awarenesses in the communities where people will have more education on how you can prevent mental illness. That helps a lot as well. Like for an example, a woman who is pregnant, we do antenatal classes, information sessions where we will be sharing that don't drink alcohol, don't use this and that because you might have alcohol fetal syndrome child. So awarenesses are quite critical.
Okay, all right. Perhaps before we start talking about treatment, I believe we have a caller, Maki, on the line. Maki, hello?
Hello?
Paki, sorry. Paki, welcome to Hot Talk. Your question, please.
Yes, Norman, thank you very much for taking this call. I really appreciate it. You know what? This is such a wonderful topic you have this morning. My concern really is one, especially about managers or those people who are directly dealing with people in the workplace who are actually in the cold phase. How important is it for them to understand these types of disorders? I'll tell you reason why I'm asking, because they actually have such an amount contribution to why people would actually be absent in the workplace.
All right. Okay. That's fine.
If they can just cover that, please, for them, because mental disorder really they are very serious, and I can tell you they cost the country, not only companies, huge amounts of money. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Thank you very much for your question, Paki. Very interesting question. Just now we spoke about the workplace. I mean, what he's essentially saying is, what sort of tools can line managers have to be able to, I would imagine, maybe just ensure that they prevent mental illness and they recognize signs of mental illness? Any takers?
It's a difficult one in the workplace because you don't necessarily need to disclose that you have a mental health problem.
Yeah.
But if you need support, if you need certain things in place, then obviously, it's better for you if your employer does know. In terms of who to disclose to, generally it would be your human resources person, and they then need to ensure that there is sort of adequate training and understanding within the team in order to implement those types of requirements for you. But people do worry about it because they're worried that there'll be a stigma, they'll be assumed that they can't do their job properly, all sorts of things like that. So they try and keep it to themselves, and that often can make things worse for them.
Yeah. Before we run out of time, your comment, but also I just want to then start talking about treatment options available. Yeah.
The important thing in the workplace, depression in the workplace or anxiety in the workplace, is the disturbance in thought.
Yeah.
They battle to focus, to concentrate. So it really is quite a challenge to manage that in the workplace. And the stigma is huge.
Right.
People, you could rather have another illness, HIV or cancer or anything else, and you'll be much better supported than you are if you have depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder. It's really not handled well in the workplace. I don't know all the answers, don't know the solution, but I can tell you there's a big problem.
I wanted to come in that I think for the employers it's critical, the awarenesses that I was talking about, that if within their wellness budget they can consult the mental health institutions like ours, where we come in and explain to the management at large and also to the employees, so that people it's easier, because you find that there's a factor of taking medication also. So you find that people, when they are in the workplace, they end up defaulting on medication because they are not free to tell the manager or the human resource person that every month I go for my medications. So there should be reasonable accommodation from the employer's side.
Yeah. Quite a complex place, the workplace. Okay, maybe let's just take a break here. We'll come back to the question of treatment and support after the break. When we come back, we now talk about treatment and support for anybody with a mental illness. Please stay with us.
In Africa, mobile devices are tools to make payments, browse the internet, and keep governments in check with social media forums.
It's given an average African too much power in their hands.
And tech creativity is solving some of the continent's problems.
Everything is internet driven.
And on Network, we tell you how Africans are using technology and social media in their everyday lives.
Join Siphumelele Zondi on Network every Sunday at 19:30 CAT.
Art is a personal expression that evokes a flame from within.
Street art, it's a vast concept.
Dancing is one of the main art forms on the streets of Africa. Regardless of how it is done, the streets remain expressive. A passionate artist in the central business district of Johannesburg.
Yeah, I've been doing this it's been 7 years or 8 years now.
Brains lost control on what to do then. Words dispute in the mouth of a woman.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays, 5:30 p.m. on SABC News.
Mental health is more than a mere lack of mental disorders. Health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Family members are often the primary caregivers of people with mental disorders. They provide emotional and physical support, and often have to bear the financial burden associated with mental health treatment and care.
15 years and all you're worried about is a postcard. Sorry, Adrian, you know it's Yeah, I don't want your pity.
It is estimated that 1 in 4 families have at least one member currently suffering from a mental or behavioral disorder.
Do things that make you happy. Be active. Get fresh air, take more walks. Assert yourself.
Rejection by friends, relatives and neighbors and the community as a whole can increase the family's sense of isolation, resulting in restricted social activities and the denial of equal participation in normal social networks.
The neighbors are talking about you already. They're saying that you're useless.
Leave me alone.
Informal caregivers need more support. The failure of society to acknowledge the burden of mental disorders on affected families could mean that very little support is available to them. The cost for the treatment of mental illness are often borne by the family because they are generally not covered by the state or by medical insurance. Family members may need to set aside a significant amount of their time to care for a loved one with a mental disorder. Unfortunately, the lack of understanding on the part of most employers and the lack of social employment schemes to address this issue sometimes render it difficult for family members to gain employment or to hold on to an existing job, or they may suffer a loss of earning due to days taken off from work. Persons with mental disorders often suffer a wide range of human rights violations and social stigma. In addition to the social and economic toll, those suffering from mental illness are often victims of human rights violations, stigma, and discrimination.
Yeah, indeed, family has a critical role to play in supporting those with mental illnesses. Now, we're going to discuss in a little more detail now, support, perhaps starting with treatment. But before we do that, let's welcome Motsabi on the line from Germiston. Motsabi, welcome to Health Talk.
Okay, good morning, doctor. Good morning, and to your visitors. I've got a brother, he's in Vanderbilt Park. He started showing symptoms of schizophrenic disorder around 2000. And now he's got withdrawal symptoms. He becomes aggressive sometimes and hallucinations. So I wanted to help him, but because of this aggression that he shows sometimes, I don't know what to do and where to start from. Because it's not like he's getting worse, but sometimes he's better, because he can do his washing, he can do other things normally, but sometimes he changes their mood swings.
Right.
And my fear is aggression because he lives with my mother alone.
All right. Very interesting question. Thank you very much. Do you perhaps want to clarify anything? All right. Thank you very much, Motsabi. You'll just listen to the response from our experts. Dr. Liebenberg?
If he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, he should be on medication and chronic medication.
Yeah.
And we didn't hear from her whether he is on medication, whether he stays on medication.
Yeah.
The problem is also it's a psychotic disorder,
Right.
so that the insight is lost. The patient himself will not understand that he needs treatment.
Yeah.
Therefore, there needs to be a lot of support from community, from health services to help the family. It's very difficult to live with something like that. He needs to be on medication every day of his life.
She mentions this periods of aggression. Practically, what can she do at that time that somebody is aggressive?
That usually happens when people have defaulted from medication, or they're late with their medication, or they are taking substances.
Let's just take it from there. I mean, there's talk of cost of medication and so on. Let's talk about treatment options for mental illness. I mean, obviously, we're talking medication. We'll talk about other forms of treatment just now, yeah.
Medication is available, not just in the private sector. There are clinics available, and they will, if you go to your local clinic, they will refer to either a psychiatric clinic or a hospital, wherever the help is available. So there are. We have antidepressants, we have mood stabilizers, we have antipsychotic medications. So we can treat with medication, and the treatment is successful. But you need to swallow the pills.
Right. For how long? That's the other bit.
If it's a lifelong disorder such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, then it's lifelong medication. It's a dynamic process, so it might change from time to time, the dosages, or be adapted. But with depression, we're talking 6 months to a year at the very least of treatment.
So the role of family here is just to support this person that's on medication, to ensure that this person takes medication on a daily basis so that they don't relapse. You wanted to comment on that case?
Well, I think also when it comes to bipolar, family can be very important to start to notice if there's any changes in the mood, and start to point that out for the person who's suffering from the disorder. Because, as Dr. Liebenberg said, is that often people start to get well and then they feel like they don't need the medication anymore. But for some disorders, they need to be on that for their whole lives.
Once we're still here, let's talk about psychotherapy. At what point is psychotherapy, necessary, or is included as part of treatment?
Well, in my opinion, it's always necessary. Obviously, in some cases, medication is essential, but often people don't want to take medication. And in a lot of sort of milder cases, they don't necessarily have to take medication, but therapy will take longer to have an impact. And again, it's something that people need to engage with. So it's not just that you come and you sit and you sort of get well. You have to actively participate in the therapy. And it can be anything from sort of 6, 8, 10 sessions up to a couple of years in therapy. It very much depends on the approach and the presenting problem and the individual themselves. So it's certainly not a quick fix.
Ms. Masuku, in terms of our capacity as a country to deal with the burden of mental illness, are we able to treat those people that have mental illness appropriately?
I would say we are quite lacking in terms of that. We don't have enough psychiatrists, we don't have enough psychologists. And then in terms of mental health practitioners, you find that those that are even there are sometimes not supported in terms of financial support to be able to give the programs that are required in terms of mental health. Can I comment on that case also?
Sure.
Because I wanted to talk about the aggression. Aggression, you have to look at the level of aggression. If a person can still be able to be maintained and taken to hospital for treatment or whatever, it's easier. But also they can also call in SABC, because according to the Mental Health Care Act, they have a responsibility to help the families and other people. Like in our facilities, we normally call the SABC to help us to take these people, if they are very aggressive, to the hospital. So I just wanted to clarify that process for the caller.
But I suppose the most important aspect is, family support to ensure that the person doesn't get to that stage in the first place.
Yes. I think I can also appeal, when you've put a person also in a facility, family members must still give that support, because... Yes.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I'm sorry if I was being rude to you. That's all we have for today. And ladies, thank you so much for your contribution. Okay, folks, as is, that's all we have for you today. And please remember to share your views and comments on Facebook by going to SABC Health Talk, and of course, like our page, and follow us on Twitter at SABC Health Talk. And of course, just drop us an email if you want at healthtalk@sabc.co.za. So until next week, same time on SABC News, cheerios for me. Remember also, please repeat shows at 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. And if you missed any of those, you can still get it from the YouTube channel. So from me, Dr. Sello Mutaung, and the rest of the crew here, thank you very much for watching the program. Cheerio.